Homeworld Deserts of Kharak is an RTS, primarily ground-based title by a little studio called Blackbird Interactive, made up of industry vets including founders of Relic. And it's published by Gearbox Software because they bought the Homeworld IP in 2013. On the plus side, Gearbox wasn't involved in the development, so things didn't get farmed out to inexperienced studios to save a buck. The game follows Rachel Sajet, a science operative in the military who seems to get all of the dangerous jobs. However, she's just a small part of the overall experience following the sand dune carrier Capisi, building units and destroying the opposing Galcian forces in search of an object that may save their world. The game releases on Steam January 20th with a launch price of $50 USD, barring any launch promotions. For a game taking place in a barren wasteland of a desert, it actually looks pretty decent, at least from the default high top-down view. As you roll the camera in, the detail is of course less impressive, but it is worth keeping in mind that a game like this is designed to have large-scale battles, and for the most part you're intended to be watching the action from way above. From a performance perspective, I maintained a healthy 60 frames per second. What I did come across, however, were some very bizarre unit, effect, and screen hitching occurrences. In fact, these are two separate events. The screen hitching usually occurs when larger scale battles were commencing, where the screen would freeze for a quarter of a second or so. The unit and effect hitching is best showcased by these sand tornadoes, where you can see that the object is simply not moving smoothly. It may seem like an odd critique, but the fact that I noticed it during a battle when my attention was elsewhere does say a thing or two. Further, there are numerous occasions where units will clip through one another or the terrain. This is not an issue for the most part because of the distance, but when you're scrolling in and see a support vehicle clip through a large derelict ship on the map, it just looks really sloppy. Also, unfortunately, the game has long load times, which, given that it's not especially complex graphically, is confusing and somewhat disappointing. Deserts of Kharak plays like most RTS titles in that you've got the usual build menus, multiple resource types, and unit limits. The units are built and deployed from the Capisi, and what I was happy to find out is that the game maintains your progress from level to level. Any units that you had at the end of the last mission, you start the next mission with. Unfortunately, this can cause something of a cascading failure if you just barely survived a mission, or snowballing success if you're amazing at the game. As an alternative to the normal view of the game, you can freely switch to a blueprint map of the area that you're in, showing your sight range, enemies that are in that range, objects of importance, and relative terrain heights. You can fully control all of the units from this view as well, if you so choose, and I found that to be a good strategy a number of times, as this map lets you have a much higher vantage point than the normal view. The Capisi carrier is used to build and deploy land units, but you can also load it with air units as well. These air units aren't directly controlled by the player, but rather launched in an airstrike fashion, which is an excellent way of softening up an incoming group of enemy units. Your land units are comprised of light to heavy units as well, including these little low-damage fast-driving dune buggies and heavy long-range, high-damage railguns. Those terrain heights that I mentioned earlier come in very handy as well, because in Deserts of Kharak, height matters. Getting your railguns up on top of a dune for the increased damage of height and ensuring that they can see to their fullest range is important. Equally important is pulling your squad back behind a dune that breaks line of fire, forcing the enemy units to engage you at a closer range. There are also unit upgrades like other RTSs. I wasn't much of a fan of the upgrade system. To me, the idea of having to research something and that research taking 30 seconds where all of a sudden we have access to a new weapon or a new unit is immersion breaking. It's reasonable that the Capisi has a host of units inside but can only control so many at one time, thus the quick deployment times even when you're spending resources, but the research thing is just nonsensical. And similar to games like Supreme Commander, the vehicles consistently drive around during the battles, which makes the whole thing feel more dynamic than a game like StarCraft. I would have liked to see more consistency in shift-clicking to repeat tasks or initiate tasks with groups, and having each in the group do the task before individuals repeat. What I mean by this is, in StarCraft, if you hold down shift with a unit selected to, say, build a supply depot, that unit will build more than one. Or if multiple units are selected, each will build one before any repetition occurs. Selecting units by shift-clicking works for movement on waypoints in Homeworld, but Rachel, for example, can set down explosive charges, and for some reason shift-clicking doesn't work there. The battle sounds and other effects are quite good, with unit-level audio alerting you to various concerns out there on the battlefield. There are also comments barked out by voiced NPCs throughout missions communicating back and forth. From a bug perspective, I found that quest-related dialogue would often repeat itself. It initially seemed as though this was intentional, to remind the player what had already been said as an objective target, but it became apparent later on that some dialogue just seems to repeat for no obvious reason. The voice acting is hit and miss. I found the voice of Ashley to be particularly boring. Some of the military voices are believable, but for the most part, none of them were amazing performances. The background music is ambient for the most part, just blends in with the game audio. It's essentially unremarkable in every way.
Crew morale remains high despite the constant engagement with Gaussian forces. I can't say enough about the men.
Is Homeworld Deserts of Kharak fun? Absolutely. It gives you the experience of a game like Supreme Commander, that being a top-down RTS with a feeling of large scale, but without the complexity. It's a reasonably solid title with some clipping and sound issues, but otherwise performs well and doesn't have very many problems. The graphics are pleasant from afar, but get less so the closer to the action you become, but the action of battles with vehicles being in constant motion makes that less of an issue. The Blueprint Overworld map is practical, and swapping between that and the live view gives a very tactical feel to the title. Sound design is good for vehicles and weapons, but the music is a bit lackluster and voiceovers not especially amazing. This is a title that I'm going to recommend. It's a good game that will give you plenty of fun, and if you can get it on sale, even better. This has been a review of Homeworld Deserts of Kharak by Blackbird Interactive. My name's Tarmack. Thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.